Hey guys, it's TheFrXion here, Tiger Tank 12, however you call me, I don't really care, and welcome back to World of Tanks. And today, yes, as you could see prior, we made a video about my responsibility to the World of Tanks community and the premium tanks that I do review. And I think still I'm going to be reviewing premium tanks because they are kind of like it's an archive for me, and it's also like I bought these tanks, I wanted to review them, and I want to give out tips to players out there if there's ever a sale or something like that and they want to invest something into the game. It's like obviously I don't want to keep anything from them so that they at least are informed what they might be getting themselves into. So we're going to be reviewing the T26E5, definitely one of the better premium tanks out there, one of the best if I can say so. I've been playing this tank a couple of days now because I just wanted to get a bit of credits, and also I wanted to 3-mark this vehicle because I had it at 2 marks for about 2 years, and now I finally managed to 3-mark this tank. And it actually didn't take as long as I expected, but this tank is really cool. So before we get into it, let's talk real fast about the origin of the T26E5. There's also a Patriot version with the Patriot skin, We the People right there. I think it's a bit kitsch. So I much rather play the non-skinned version. But obviously, if you're a super big fan of, the United States of America, you can get a very patriotic skin for it. But yeah, I own both of them, and I prefer the one without the skin because it isn't as obnoxious. So yeah, the T26 was actually built. They built 27 versions of this according to Wargaming, and Chrysler managed to build them, and it was just supposed to be the heavy variant for the M26 Pershing. Now the M26 Pershing, according to different sources, is a tank that is already kind of looked at as a heavy tank. And I think definitely if you would go back into the era that the M26 Pershing was introduced at 1944, 1920, 1945, the M26 Pershing definitely could have been or should have been looked at as a heavy tank. But in World of Tanks it's a medium tank, and we have the T26E5 as the heavy tank variant. So you're equipped with a 19mm gun, which has the standard 240 alpha damage, 230 millimeters of pen. You have APCR rounds as premium and non-premium shells, so having that additional shell velocity is really good. You have 1,021 meters per second with the standard shells. That is not very good for standard, or let's say premium APCR shells. But since that is kind of like the standard shell type you're getting, that is actually pretty nice. It's a nice little change of pace from all the AP that you have, and that's definitely a big plus. 230 millimeters of pen is amazing at tier 8. You're going to be able to be competitive at tier 9, even at tier 10, if you just keep on aiming at the weak spots. This tank that I currently have, it has been fully upgraded now with the field modifications. I can show you guys the field modifications real fast afterwards when we've gone through all the characteristics. And yes, then obviously we're going to look into the gameplay as well. But these field modifications can give you quite a bit of a big improvement in certain areas, but you also have a bit of a decrease in efficiency in other areas as well. The rate of fire on this tank is amazing, 10 rounds per minute. That is basically a 6-second reload time that I have with the tank. That comes in with a very good crew, with good equipment, and also with the modifications. But you can get this all the way down to 10 rounds per minute. That's really good. The turret rotation isn't very good. That's not a strong suit of the vehicle, 26.67 degrees per second. It's certainly not the heavy tank with the fastest turret turn time, but still I think you can work with it. Having 10 degrees of gun depression is going to be really good though. 20 degrees of gun elevation is also going to give you quite a bit of leeway, but the 10 degrees of gun depression will make this a very good ridge warrior. And we'll get to that in just a second, especially with the turret and the armor design that we have on this vehicle. So the aim time is 2.01 seconds, so the aim time is pretty good as well. especially considering you have the 90mm gun. So you have a very good aim time. Your dispersion is, on the other hand, not the best, 0.35. That is with better improvements. So actually it would be 0.36. So this tank is very good in close to medium ranges, but at longer ranges, you're gonna find yourself in some situations where you might not hit the weak spot every single time. The DPM though is pretty damn amazing. 2,411 damage per minute. That comes together with that crazy rate of fire and that 240 alpha that you have, which is not very big, and you'll certainly notice when you're playing this tank, but that rate of fire really makes up for the alpha damage that you have on this tank. So let's move on to the survivability, and the survivability is one of those things that really makes this tank. It has 1,550 hit points. That is, I think, for a tier 8 heavy tank like the norm now. The hull armor is really good. 152mm thickness at the front. You have a nice angle as well. It is a bit flat, so certain tanks will be able to punch right through your upper plate and your lower plate. But the 152mm really is quite nice. That's a lot of thickness for a tier 8 tank. You have 76 on the side, 51 on the rear. That is like almost all American heavy tanks, like standard to have very limited side armor and rear armor. Your turret armor, on the other hand, is really good. You have 191mm frontal armor that can be penetrated on certain positions, such as the commander's hatch on top. You also have a very big kind of turret alignment right there in the lower place where the turret aligns with the turret with the hull. You have 114mm on the side, 127 on the rear. And you can really work with this tank, especially if you're running as a tier 8 vehicle. You have quite a bit of armor to go around with. So that's a very nice thing to have. Now couple that with decent mobility and 40 kilometers per hour top speed, you have a tank on your hand that is really competitive and that doesn't have any real downsides. It doesn't weigh as much, about 50 tons max. It has a decent horsepower to weight ratio of 15.06 horsepower per ton that you can work with. Your traverse speed isn't the worst either, 33.78. For a heavy tank, I think that is rather mobile. And the 40 kilometers per hour top mark for a heavy tank with that kind of armor layout is something that really is making it a very good package deal. So that's a very good deal. It's a very good vehicle with very good statistics that come together to play on this vehicle. Now the turret, on the other hand, your view range is going to be 390 meters. Your camouflage values aren't going to be as amazing since you're a heavy tank, but you can really work with this tank. You can make it a very competitive vehicle, and definitely it's been one of my better tier 8 premium tanks. And if we just check the statistics on my T26E5, we can just go and look at what kind of a crazy workhorse it actually is. So let me just go to tier 8. Let me just go look for it real fast so I can find it, and there it is. So I have a 62% win rate on it, 1,064 experience per battle on average, and the damage output is about 1,789 per game. Now for a tier 8 heavy tank, I think that is not too bad. I had 3 top guns and about 130 games played. So yeah, very good vehicle indeed. It's a very reliable tank, and a tank that forgives a lot of mistakes since you have a very high rate of fire. You have decent enough armor. If you make a mistake, you can still bounce quite a couple of shots. And you can learn how to play American heavy tanks quite easily by playing the T26E5, because down the line, the turret is becoming more important. Hull down experiences are really important, especially if you're playing the T110E5 line. That's where you really get into those hull down positions, and where you also are lacking the side armor to have any kind of protection from the side or the rear. So if we look at the different modules that we can use for the modifications, there are several that, like the very first one gives you the option to have different kind of loadouts, the second or the third one as well. With the second tier, or with the second modification, you can choose between having better or maintaining better top speed, or having better hull traverse speed and suspension durability. But since I have equipment for that, I chose to go with the better top speed, or maintaining the speed better. And then the other version, or the other modification, is about the aim time, or the aiming speed. So the thing is, I wanted to get better accuracy with this tank, because I think the aim time is good enough with 2 seconds to get fully zoomed in. So I decided to go with the other to give me the maximum kind of accuracy that I can have on this tank. And then finally, with modification 5, I was able to choose between having less stun or better view range. Since I'm playing a heavy tank, view range is not as important for me, so I want to go with less stun from artillery. And the very last category that you can pick is to be able to pick another speciality, which gives you like the ability to go for equipment that gets a bonus, because it's like a class bonus. So I chose to go with the firepower equipment, because I want to get an even better rate of fire on this tank. So that basically covers everything I think that you need to know about the tank, considering the characteristics and the stats of it. So I'd say without further ado, let's jump into the gameplay, and let's talk about how well this tank can actually fare in battle, and why it's such a competitive vehicle in World of Tanks. So the game that I've prepared for you guys is actually on the new map Safe Haven, but the replay name is actually still Japan Port. So they never changed that, because this map was in the game, I think, a very long time ago as a test, I think on the test server, and they had to rework it several times to then finally push it out now in the year 2021. But I think I've seen gameplay on this map like a couple of years ago, but it was never on the live server. So enough about the map's history, let's talk about the T26E5. The T26E5, as already mentioned, is a very good all-rounder. It doesn't have any apparent weaknesses or any real downsides to it. And especially, I think, the gun handling and the general, I think, mobility stats make this tank what it is today. And it makes this vehicle very, very competitive. You have 10 degrees of gun depression, so you are extremely flexible. Your rate of fire is extremely good. You have very good pen. You would almost never have to go back to premium shells. You can always use standard APCR shells, because I think you're even going to be doing good with them at tier 9 and even tier 10. And the armor on the vehicle is also quite competitive. So right here on Japan Port, or on the Haven map, Safe Haven, there is actually a bunker system right next to the port, or right in the port, where you can go up via the ramps. And with 10 degrees of gun depression, what you can do with this is you can just basically shoot at targets that are up here without having to expose any part of your tank other than your turret. That's something not everyone can do, as you can see with the AE Phase 1, because the AE Phase 1 needs to go all the way up here to be able to engage the M103. Now, at this part of the battle, we have already been able to showcase that incredible rate of fire on the T26E5. Now, we have probably had about 4 or 5 penetrating shots, and we're at about 1,194 damage. Now, this M103, since he's been trying to get into cover, was driving directly at us, because we were able to just eat away at him slowly, steadily, one shot at a time. And the thing is, you can see these guys just don't have any ability to stop us up here. So if you get into a position such as this with the T26E5, you're going to be really, really competitive. Now, the only real downside I see to this tank is maybe the accuracy that you are not really having. You have an accuracy of 0.35, and you will actually notice that when you are trying to hit weak spots in certain tanks. Now, if you're a player who prefers more alpha than the rate of fire, you want to hit hard, but you don't want, like, it's not really important to have the highest rate of fire for you, then obviously the T26E5 is maybe not the best option, because the rate of fire here is basically the king. The DPM really makes you very dangerous, makes you a very dangerous opponent, coupled with the 230mm of pen and with the fact that you have very good gun depression angles and decent armor. You can really be a main threat. Now, this tank is not invincible per se. There are still tanks that can easily take you on if you're in front of them. At tier 8 and tier 9, your armor is not going to be working. Let's say at tier 9 and tier 10, your armor is not going to be always working, especially if you're not hull down. So you have to be a bit careful when you're out in the open. But if you're in a position such as this one, where I'm currently at, you can really be a competitive little tank that just holds the angles and waits for the enemies to make a mistake. And because of that rate of fire, you're just really able to dish out the damage that basically the other tanks just cannot really do. So right here we have decided to reposition ourselves and go down the slope to actually help out the T30, but the T30 unfortunately just lost his life. And you can see that we have basically managed to get most of the important parts of the map under our control, and the enemy team is kind of pinned down in the middle. They still have quite a few tank destroyers out in the field, but having a majority of their force pinned down inside of the tunnel, they are really limited in their ability to move. And obviously, since your top speed isn't too bad, your mobility isn't too bad, we can still reposition and put some pressure on these guys. And once again, I just want to highlight that rate of fire, giving us the ability to knock out these tanks really quickly without our team getting any more damage into them. So we have achieved 2,126 damage, 3 kills, about 1,264 damage assisted so far. And now we're about to just clean up the rest that is still out here. And because of that rate of fire and because of the, I'd say, the mobility of this tank, we're still able to pick up more damage, and that is something that is really welcoming when you're trying to earn credits, because your damage output is in the end going to be deciding about if you're going to get more credits or less credits. So if you do perform very nicely and you have the ability to still make or do damage at the end of the round, you're really going to be able to earn a lot of credits. And that's just basically what this tank is. This is a credit printing machine. I think I made about 2 million credits playing this tank for maybe 20 rounds the last 2-3 days. And I've basically only played this tank, and I didn't really have a lot of bad games because I kind of have the knowledge on how to play this tank. Now, once again, I just want to point out that the armor layout on this vehicle really is good. It's a good armored tank, and it really can perform really nicely in these engagements. And there is really no bad thing about this tank. I can't say anything bad about the T26E5, and that's maybe where we run into a couple of problems. When you have tanks that you can buy for real money, that have no downsides to them, that are incredibly strong, you're gonna run into issues eventually, because the paying customer is going to be really happy about the tank they receive. The non-playing customer who is fighting against this tank is not going to have a good time on the other side. And those things are just really important that we talk about them as well, that the introduction of these premium tanks that Wargaming have started doing, like always faster, maybe stronger, better pen, maybe a higher rate of fire, or more damage output. Like what we currently are seeing is more and more alpha, higher alpha, better alpha, being able to, you know, one-shot or two-shot opponents when they're lower tiers than you. And those kind of things, in the end, they really detract from the experience that you have in this game. And I think it's really important that Wargaming do rethink their strategy with premium tanks, because you cannot always go better and better and better, because tier 8 is already a tier that is basically should be split up into tier 9 tanks and tier 8 tanks, because there are certain tier 8 vehicles that shouldn't even be at tier 8. There are certain tier 8 vehicles that shouldn't be at tier 8 because of how good they are. They should be at tier 9 or maybe even 9.5, some of them. And that's basically how they've developed the game in the last couple of years. So maybe Wargaming really need to rethink their strategy right there. But for the sake of this video, for the sake of the archive, and for the review, I'm going to say that the T26E5 is a really good tank. There is basically no reason not to get this tank if you can ever, purchase it, maybe on sale. And if you're ever thinking about getting an American heavy tank as a premium, this is probably one of the best options you can get. And I just want to point that out, that yeah, the only downside is maybe that you don't have the alpha damage, you don't have the crazy 490 alpha that some other tanks have, but you make away with that with the crazy rate of fire. And yeah, the fact that you don't really need to use any premium shells with this tank at all, even when you're playing against tier 9 tanks and tier 10 tanks, because I think even at tier 10 you can basically damage most vehicles with 230 millimeters of pen if you know the weak spots of the vehicles. So I hope this video wasn't too long. As always, comment, like, and subscribe, and tell me what do you think about the T26E5. I'll see you guys on the next video. Till then, have a good one.